Okay, so this talk is brought to you by Garden Green, and Garden Green is a community effort to reduce the use of toxic pesticides on Vashon Island and Western Washington. Michael Laurie started Garden Green, or has been involved in Garden Green since 2007, and I joined in 2014. So together we're like the core, and people come in and help, and we do all kinds of things. We work with retailers here on the island and elsewhere in Western Washington to get them to stock less of the toxic products and more of the green products, and we're having some success there. We do public education, like today. We talk at schools and talk to school children. We talk to parks departments, the land trust, for-profit and not-for-profit organizations. We table at events. Last Saturday I was at the farmers market. We write articles in the newspapers. We have been interviewed on the radio, and we prepare handouts like we're giving out today, and also things that retailers can hand out as well. So we do a lot of things, and we put a lot of our handouts and things are on the website that we have and our Facebook page, which are both listed in your reference sheet. So over the years, we've been funded in many different ways to do this work. The Groundwater Protection Committee for Vashon Maury Island is funding us this year, along with King County. Puget Sound Partnership is funding this particular, the Rose Foundation is funding this particular talk today. We've also had private donations and our own volunteer time and money. Okay, so lawns. Wow, lawns. What should lawns be? What do we want? And things are changing now. You know, our lawns used to be more green in the summers, and the last 3 years they've been drying up pretty significantly. And so it's time for us to take a look at what we want our lawns to be. It's very expensive to keep them green all summer, but through watering. Do we need to do that? And do all lawns have to be pure grass? You know, before World War II, seed mixes for lawns included clover because it captures nitrogen from the air and fixes nitrogen to provide fertilizer for the grass. But after World War II, with the advent of chemical nitrogen and fertilizer, and also 2,4-D weed killers, it was considered to be the best thing to do to have nothing but pure grass and get rid of the clover and other broadleaf weeds. So that raises a question. I mean, it didn't always be this. It wasn't always this way. Do lawns have to be monoculture with just one single type of plant in our lawn? Doesn't have to be. Not very many are, actually, except maybe on a golf course. And are there good broadleaf weeds? Are broadleaf weeds always the enemy? Not necessarily, I'd say. Good broadleaf weeds would include clover, yarrow, lawn daisy, blue-eyed grass, yellow-eyed grass. And why would these be considered good broadleaves in a lawn? They're great for pollinators. They have flowers that the pollinators can get nectar from. And they stay green in dry summers. That's important. So there's different kinds of lawns. Are there niches for different kinds of lawns? There certainly are. And there are so many to choose from now. Could I borrow this?
Sure.
This is Sunmark Seeds seed list. This is one of the two companies in Portland that specialize in eco-turf and eco-lawns. And they have a dizzying list of mixes that you can use. I'll just read a few of them. Bee Feed Wildflower, Bird and Butterfly Wildflower, Celebration, Coastal Grasslands, DOT Multipurpose, Green Roof Ecology, Native Wildflower, Mountain Wildflower, and it goes on and on and on. Sky's the limit, and you can create custom blends for exactly what you want. So the other question is, who decides what's appropriate for a lawn? We're very fortunate. I'm not sure if there's any housing development or apartment building situation on Vashon where you are required to have a perfect lawn. Do you know of any? No, I didn't think so. So we're so fortunate. We can grow anything we want on our lawns in Vashon. And so why not? Let's get creative. So I'll be talking to you about different options. Michael, you want to get a chair so you can sit? Here's one right here.
I could. Okay. Excuse me.
Sorry. So now, what is an eco-lawn? It's a lawn alternative that often includes grasses and low-growing flowering plants. You can hear different terms. You can call them ecology lawns, you might hear that, or bee lawns is a term that I've heard recently, or an herb lawn. But whatever they are, they should be compatible with typical uses for a conventional lawn, like sitting, strolling, general play, and as a nice backdrop for the rest of your garden and your flowers. ProTime Lawn Seeds Rough and Ready Mix, that's this one here, combines a typical sports turf grasses with microclover to make it more drought tolerant, less fertilizer, and less watering. So this would be very similar to a standard grass mix, very tough, play on it, whatever, but it's got the clover in it. So with the clover, it adds those benefits of less watering, less fertilizing, and it stays green in our dry summers, even if you choose to not water hardly at all. So the types of eco-friendly lawns, there's several that in general categories that we can think about and we'll talk about here. One that I just mentioned is the broadleaf plants mixed with grasses that's mown fairly regularly, like at Vashon High School. And there's a meadow mix, flowering meadow mix, that's mown only in spring and fall. 100% clover lawn, that's mown infrequently. You can mow it or not as you wish. And there's a no-mow grass mix, which is another option for you, mown once or twice a year. So the first one we want to talk about is the grass and flower lawn. This photo is from Vashon High School. How many of you have seen it in bloom? Not everybody. So this is really interesting that Vashon High School has an eco-lawn. And I thought, wow, that is so cool. When I first saw it, I was just so excited about it. And so I inquired to find out more about their eco-lawn and how it came to be. And I put together a frequently asked questions for the high school, because no one at the high school had all the answers. So I did research and came up with them. So they put in this eco-lawn because it was required by Washington's Sustainable Schools Protocol to put in an eco-lawn. How about that? And it was put in 2014. The mix includes 45% perennial ryegrass, 45% fine fescue grass, 5% dwarf white yarrow, 2% wild English daisies. You'd think it was a lot more when you see how many is there now. 2% baby blue eyes, and 1% other. I'm assuming the other was microclover that they had in that mix. They got their seed from Sunmark Seeds International, which I have their catalog back there, which is how I even discovered them. And who put it in was a company out of Tacoma called Specialized Landscaping. And they did, here's how they prepared it. The on-site topsoil was removed for construction of the new high school and saved. The subsoil had 2.5 inches of organic cedar grove compost mixed into it. That was then capped with the existing topsoil. Then lime was blended into the top 1/2 inch of the topsoil. And finally, the seed mix was applied along with 10-20-20 fertilizer in the water of the hydro seeder. This was a big project. They did hydro seeding, and they found that worked really well. You don't have to do it that way. There's lots of ways to do this. This is just how they did it at the high school. So for watering of this turf at the high school, temporary and permanent irrigation methods were used. So as the plants developed, the temporary irrigation was removed, because when they're first coming up, it's really important that they never dry out. So they made sure that those little baby seedlings got plenty of water. For the first couple of years, the permanent underground irrigation provided about 3/4 of an inch per week during the dry summer months. And then that dropped down to around 1/2 an inch per week, beginning in the 3rd year. So a typical lawn requires about 1 inch per week to stay green. So this is using half the water now that they would have normally used. They do water right before school starts a bit more, so that's really looking good, and that it's really strong for the extra foot traffic that they get with the beginning of school. For fertilizing, between the compost and soil amendment and the initial fertilizing, they haven't had to fertilize hardly at all. So that's really good. Now they mow it every 10 to 14 days. So that's certainly better than mowing it every week, which is about 1/3 less than a conventional lawn. So that's reduced their fossil fuel consumption at the school and staff time. They like to let it go to flowering height before they mow so that everybody gets to enjoy the flowers. And that means that they're deadheading the flowers then when they mow, which encourages them to bloom some more. They don't use any pesticides, and they have a good mix of plants, so insects and diseases are much less of an issue than in a typical grass lawn. And they never use things like weed and feed, because that would kill all these beautiful flowers. And that's the main reason that we're really interested in EcoTurf. The students love it. What does Vashon High School think about it? They're huge fans now. It took them a while to get rid of the expectation that it should look like a golf course fairway. But once they got over that, then they like it more every year, they said. And every comment they've gotten from the public has been positive. So there you go. That's our very own example of a very successful eco-lawn right here on Vashon. So there's also the flower meadow lawn. For people who really love the flowers and don't mind if it gets a bit tall and just wants a path through it, this is great. These can be mostly native, annual, biennial, and perennial flowers, plus some grass. And you can customize these blends for your own color preference, so you could have just what you want. You would only mow it or string trim it once or twice a year. And there's a couple of chairs up front if you'd like to sit, and there's one over there too. Okay. It's sun or shade, drought tolerant, and really great for pollinators. So ProTime Lawn Seed out of Portland has the following meadow mixes: native urban meadow mix, partial shade wildflower mix, perennial wildflower mix, and here's one I think it's going to be really important for us: deer-resistant wildflower mix. So I'll just tell you a little bit about what's in the deer-resistant wildflower mix, because that would be the one for Vashon, I think. It's 17 species, considered unpalatable to deer, and contains 34% perennials and 66% annuals. It gets 8 to 48 inches tall. It includes 4 different kinds of lupins: zinnia, blanket flower, also known as gaillardia, 2 kinds of coreopsis, blue pimpernel, California orange poppy, scarlet sage, gloriosa daisy, blue sage, Shirley poppy, and sweet alyssum. So it sounds like a lovely mix, doesn't it? So there's one to consider, is a flower meadow lawn. Then we have clover lawns, all clover. There's several kinds of clover. There's regular clover and there's also mini clover. Mini clover doesn't get very tall and it doesn't bloom as much as regular clover. And so that's an option, and I put in a mini clover lawn for a client last year. Here's the bag of seed, one of the bags of seed from the mini clover. So clover is a nitrogen fixer, so you don't need to fertilize a clover lawn. And clover is even more drought tolerant than grass. I don't know if you've noticed in your lawns, if you haven't been watering, the grass is dry now, but there's spots of green in places. Some of those spots of green would be clover that is still green even now. And I've noticed that along the highway when I walk to catch the bus. I look and what's green? Little bitty yarrow plants are green and clover is still green. Wow. And if you mix it in, then the whole thing looks green. It doesn't have to be 100% clover, this is, but clover is really important for a mix for an ecoturf. It can be in sun or shade. You can mow it more often than once or twice a year if you wish. That's up to you. Great for pollinators. So that's the clover lawn. Now, the no-mow grass lawn is another option. If people really love grass, this is something they might want to consider. The no-mow grass mix is typically a blend of fine fescue grasses. It's simple to maintain. The unmown grasses flop over to create this wind-tossed effect. You can mow it or line trim it once or twice a year to maintain the flopped look and then remove the seed head stalks in the summer. So ProTime's mix for this lawn includes hard fescue, sheep fescue, chewings fescue, creeping red fescue, and blue fescue. So they're all quite drought tolerant, and there's a good blend and mix in there so it can grow either in the sun or the shade or anything in between. So that's the no-mow grass lawn. So let's talk about a little bit more about why you'd want to do this in the first place. There's some wonderful benefits to switching over and away from traditional grass lawns. The high watering bills that can come about, especially if any of you are trying to keep a lawn green and are on Water District 19's water, you're paying a lot of money. Weekly mowing, ongoing fertilizing, constant weeding, and toxic herbicides like 2,4-D. So this is an issue around the world, even in Pisa, Italy. So another reason to switch, if you are of a romantic bent, she dreams of a soft ground cover wandering gently among flower beds. Where weeds now reign, she sees a textured carpet, a mix of grasses, yarrow, shamrock, clover, and sweet alyssum. Sounds pretty nice, doesn't it? So that's if you're really interested in the flowering meadow concept. Another reason to switch, or several really, our shared aquifer is really important. And as our summers continue to be dry and long, our aquifer becomes even more important. Our streams, our salmon, and Puget Sound all benefit from reduced fertilizer and no herbicides. So I'll just talk for just a little bit about 2,4-D. 2,4-D is very toxic to salmon. This 2,4-D is the weed in weed and feed. It's also found in many other herbicides. It's toxic to children and pets who like to play and roll on the grass. It's so dangerous that by law, on the label of the product, you're not allowed to put it on your lawn more than twice a year. That's pretty nasty stuff. And one of the nice things about eco lawns other than the all grass one, is you can't use this stuff or you're going to kill your eco lawn. So there's a wonderful reason, really strong reasons for us to switch over to something like this where you can't even use those herbicides on your lawn. And finally, why switch? Because you have better things to do with your precious time. So now let's talk a little bit about some of the individual typical components of an eco-lawn mix of grass and perennials that you might not be aware of. We have typically grass, everybody knows that. We've talked about clover. The lawn daisy though, Bellis perennis, we're going to talk a little bit about, and yarrow. And then there's many other options depending on your soil, your site, and how you wish to use your lawn. So let's talk about English daisy. Bellis perennis is its Latin name. These are the flowers that you see in the high school lawn. And I'm going to be showing some slides now from Oregon State University. Tom Cook is a professor of horticulture, retired now, who did a great deal of research in this whole concept over 10 years ago. And this is why 2 of the main seed companies that even do this are located in Portland. It's because of the work of Oregon State University and Tom Cook. So this is one of his slides. So English daisy is a common component of drought-stressed lawns throughout western Oregon and Washington. The wild types are very hardy and tolerate summer drought by going dormant, and they can spread by seed or vegetative propagation, which may be why we're seeing a good mix of them now in the high school lawn. More, it seems, than 2%. And there's one other thing that I really love about English daisy, and that's the fact that it's edible. You can put it in your salads. Okay. So another typical component of ecoturf is common yarrow. Yarrow was selected for the seed mixes when Oregon State did their research because it's dark green, moderately wear tolerant for walking on and running on, and very drought tolerant. It's also very compatible with turf grass. So, as Tom Cook says, without a doubt, yarrow has been the star of the show for University of Oregon research during the summer months. It stays green longer even than clover. So we'll show some examples of that. So you can see yarrow versus ryegrass, 5 weeks without water. The yarrow looks great, and the grass is starting to turn brown. And here is yarrow and white clover in summer, totally green. They're the most drought-hardy components in commercial mixes, seed mixes. They work well in summer to obscure the now dormant ryegrass or fescue while presenting a nice green cover. Normally, the Oregon researchers irrigated once a month, starting in mid-June. Once a month. That's pretty good, huh? So here's a summary of their research. When we irrigated these eco-lawn mixes once per month in the summer and mowed every 3 weeks during the growing season, the lawn stayed green and for the most part looked like a normal lawn. We never sprayed any of the plots with pesticides. Hey, what's not to like? So let's take a look at some eco-lawns in practice. This one is a commercial mixture planted around Weatherford Hall on the Oregon State University campus. It's typical of a young eco-lawn in mid-spring. That's when the flowers bloom, is mid-spring. In summer, eco-lawns look more like conventional grass lawns from a distance, especially if they're mowed occasionally. And here's another example. After nearly a month without water, the grass lawn planted to hard fescue is partially dormant and generally unattractive on the left. The eco-lawn mixture, dominated by yarrow and clover, still looks green. This is a major strength of the EcoLawn mixtures, the ability to look green under drought conditions, which we are experiencing and probably will continue to do so. And backing that up, this is a testimonial from a customer from ProTime Lawn Seed. No watering was done to either patch, but your mix with clover thrives. And you can see the difference. The top part is the mix with the clover, and the bottom part is their typical grass right along the street. And this would be in Portland, yes. Great, so I think I've probably convinced you now. Of course, you were probably partially convinced just to come to this talk. Now, how do you get started? How do you get started? First, you need to clarify your vision. What do you want? Do you want the meadow? Do you want the no-mow grass? Do you want the kind of grass and flower mix that is typical at the high school? Or something else? So that's the first thing to do is clarify your vision. What do you want? If you have grass and flowers, you'll mow it occasionally. The flower meadow, mow twice a year or so. An all clover lawn, you can do twice a year or more often. The no-mow grass, twice a year, you mow it. Now, here's another thing to consider. The next thing is, well, you calculate the square footage of your vision, and then you need to take a look at your soil depth. Because this will determine the best way to get rid of your existing lawn. So this is a soil core, and you use it to try to figure out, you put it down in your soil, and you figure out how deep is your topsoil. In many places on Vashon, the topsoil is almost non-existent, like up to here. Ideally, your topsoil would be to here. So this is so important because of the different ways to get rid of your existing lawn. If you have a very, very shallow topsoil and you're right on top of hardpan, you don't dare scrape it off because you'll be losing all your topsoil. You have to do something else. But if you have a nice deep topsoil blend, you can scrape off, do a fast job, and take and scrape off your grass and start over. So that's why I mentioned that. Very important. Okay, so then once you know your soil depth, you also need to take soil samples to find out what amendments to your soil you need. Maybe you need some more compost, maybe you need lime, maybe you need more nitrogen in your soil. So that's part of what you'll need to do. Next, you'll then need to figure out your budget. How much is this going to cost? And for reseeding a lawn, most homeowners in Seattle spend between $700 and $1,600 to redo your standard city lot lawn. So if you have a half an acre or more, it's going to cost more than that. So this is important too, to work out calculating how expensive this will be. The cheapest thing to do is reseed. The more expensive way to go is to start over. So these numbers here, are based on 17 homeowners' actual costs that they submitted. And they look about right based on my limited experience putting in eco-friendly lawns. And the high end is where the homeowner does almost none of the work themselves, and the low end is where they do a lot of the work themselves. Okay, so then what? As I mentioned, overseeding is the least expensive way to do it. But it's very important when you overseed that you give some bare soil for the seeds, because they're not going to sprout if you just cast the soil on top of your grass. They need bare soil. They need to come in contact with bare soil. So you can dethatch, you can do a heavy raking of the lawn to take out some of the grass, and then do some seeding, and also then cover it up a little bit with some soil compost mix would be a good idea, and then roll it in and water it. So that would be, and there's some guidance back there on how to do all of this, but that would be the least expensive, least amount of work. You'd still have a lot of your existing lawn grass, and so this is the kind of thing you'd want to do twice a year as you gradually work towards having the kind of eco lawn you want to have. Or you could start over, killing what you have now. And if you have thin soils, if you do a soil test and you've got really thin soils, you can't afford to scrape it off. You can't afford to do what those guys are doing. So what can you do? You can't lose any of that precious soil. You can cover it with cardboard and leave it for several months. You'd start this fall covering it up and seed in the spring. You could, in the summer, if you would start in the summer, you could cover it with black plastic or landscape fabric, carpet, something like that for several months in the summer. You can also, if you have a really sunny spot that you want to do this in, you can use clear plastic. And clear plastic is called solarization. And if you can get it to work in a really sunny spot, it's the best way, because with solarization under the clear plastic, you water the heck out of it and put the clear plastic on it, and what you're doing is encouraging all the seeds in the soil to sprout. But they get killed by the heat over a couple of months under that clear plastic in the heat of summer. But if you do it that way, you'll have fewer weed seeds in your eco lawn mix down the road. That's why it's a recommended, the people who sell these seed mixes recommend that. But in Vashon, if we're already fairly cool, it's pretty cool in the forest, and I would not recommend, personally, I would not recommend clear plastic if your lawn that you're trying to do this in is a clearing in the forest. It won't get hot enough to really kill. It'll be like a greenhouse for them. They'll just love it. So in that case, I would use black plastic if I were you, if you wanted to do it that way. So those are different options. Now, if you want to use cardboard, you can get cardboard behind ACE. There's different places on the island. You can get it in the your resource list has those. But you can also get it in rolls from Great Pacific Packaging in Tacoma. And that's much faster, and it's not terribly expensive. It's $60 for a roll of 3 feet wide, 250 feet long, delivered. Now, this is single ply, but that's okay because you only need it temporarily anyway to kill off the lawn over the winter, let's say. So that might be a really good, because you don't have tape and you don't have holes and it goes down fast, and it's something to consider. Locally, you could get ACE, I mentioned Sawbones, Pandora Pet Supply are all good places to pick up cardboard, but you have to take the tape off and you have to not have any gaps. Okay. If you're lucky and you have a lot of topsoil that you decide that you want to just scrape it off and start over, you can rent a bobcat at Island Home Center in Lumber. And they also have a sod cutter for small jobs. A sod cutter for 4 hours is $93. A whole day is $116. It's $400 for a day for the Bobcat T190. And that's how it works. You just scrape it off, set it aside, and start over if you want. Okay, then after that, so let's say you've gotten rid of your existing lawn, and now it's time to add your soil amendments, whether based on your soil test. Could be lime, organic compost, maybe more soil, organic fertilizer, depending on what your soil test has told you. So for your lime, on Vashon, we only need agricultural lime, no magnesium needed. And that can be ordered from Country Store at 50-pound bag for about $10. You can get organic compost and soil mix from Tom Carlson, 30 cubic yards of a 50-50 mix of organic compost and soil would cover half an acre, half an inch deep, and would cost right around $1,800, delivered with tax included. But you need to note that he can't drive this big truck, that's his truck, can't drive over your septic system drain field. So it may have to be wheelbarrowed, dumped in a certain place, and then wheelbarrowed to where you need it. Now, he gets his organic compost from LRI in Purdy. It's clean, green, organic vegetation compost only. There's no food waste, no plastic bits, and no smell in the organic compost that he gets. And I experienced it, and it was wonderful. Okay, then you can order your seed. For good spreading, you can mix it with sand so you don't get too much seed in one spot. And spread it, you can either do it in spring or fall. You may need to cover it, but for sure you're going to want to roll it in so it's a really good contact with the soil. And you're going to need to water it if there's not enough rain. It's very important that they don't dry out. So our window of opportunity, you need to spread the seed between mid-September and the first week in October in order for it to germinate and get established before it gets too cold. So you want to spread the seed when the weather forecast is for cool and wet conditions. But who can trust the weather forecast? So get it out there and water it until the rains begin, if you're doing it in the fall. And this is additional guidance from ProTime. Grasses and clovers typically establish first, and they leave room for flower seed that germinates later. And ecology lawns with flowers grow best on bare soil. So if you're trying to do the overseeding, you'd have probably better luck with clover than the flower mixes. So here's what she says about when. Plant after soil in the spring, after soil temps reach 50 degrees. You can buy a soil temp thermometer at locally at Ace or Island Lumber, I believe. And in the fall, 6 to 8 weeks before the first anticipated hard frost. And that's why I worked back and found what that window would be for us here. Okay. So then, my gosh, you've done it. Then you can celebrate. You can tell your friends all about it. You can take photos, tell me, and enjoy your new eco-friendly lawn. But remember, there's maintenance. It's not totally maintenance free. If you choose to go with the fleur de lawn like the high school, you would want to mow the top third of growth to encourage thick growth, mow it occasionally. When watering is needed, water deeply but infrequently to encourage deeper root development. That's if your soil is deep. If your soil is just barely scraping the top of the hard pan, you are going to have to water more often because there's just not enough soil there to hold the moisture. It's considered fully established after wintering over one winter. You want to maintain at 5 inches for a mini meadow or 3 inches for a more traditional lawn look. And no general broadleaf herbicide or weed and feed, not at all. And you can core aerate and overseed every 2 to 3 years or as needed to keep the flowers and the grasses extra vigorous. So that's the maintenance for a mix of grass and flowers. For no-mow lawns, you'll still need to mow in early summer, once in early summer and once again in the fall to keep them looking good. For clover lawns, you can mow them as you wish. When they're not mown, the clover will have more flowers. And microclover can be mown really quite short if you want a nice, tidy look. And it has fewer flowers than the Dutch white clover. So there we go. I hope you've jotted down some questions. I want to share where this gotten my information and support from. Rose Foundation's Puget Sound Stewardship and Mitigation Fund is funding this talk today. Sustainable Vashon is our fiscal sponsor because we're not a 501c3 nonprofit. Don Griffin from ProTime Lawn Seed provided the seed and a bunch of handouts, and I'll just pass that around, both of these around. You can send them different ways, maybe. Linda McMahon and Tom Cook, both from the Oregon State University, turfgrass folks. So next, we have the resources. Seed sources, ProTime Lawn Seed in Portland, Sunmark Seeds in Portland, Outside Pride, Independence, Oregon. They specialize in clover lawns. Equipment for renovating locally here, Island Home Center, King Conservation District has free soil tests, and a manure spreader, free manure spreader for large areas. Great Pacific Packaging in Tacoma has this single-face corrugated board. Septic system plans, this is important if you need to know where your drainage field is and if this is going to impact that at all. King County Health. Soil amendments, organic compost and soil, Vashon Bark and Soil. Tom Carlson, Agricultural Lime Country Store, and internet links and additional guidance, me. So, next.
What were the dates for planting in the fall?
Dates, the window of opportunity for planting in the fall. Mid-September, between mid-September and the first week in October. So it's like a 3-week window of opportunity. So you want to get onto it if you want to do it this fall. Yes?
Right now, my lawn is mostly dandelions. So if I were wanting to, I'm assuming you cover to kill all of that.
Yes.
And then my concern though is my lawn, I share, it's like there are property lines, but the grass doesn't know that. With at least 2 or 3 neighbors,
Yes.
one of whom has a real green lawn, but the rest of us pretty much just don't water, let it go brown in the summer, and have a certain amount of dandelions. My worry is I could go to all this work and still end up with a bunch of dandelions because of my neighbors.
I don't think you will, and the reason is that if it's not going to stand a chance, because yours is going to be very thick, and it's going to have clover in it probably, and that'll outcompete the dandelions.
The clover will outcompete the dandelions.
Yes. If you do get some in, and you probably will get some in, but it's not going to overwhelm it, not by any means. And you can weed those out, and you can hang on to some of the seed or have some extra seed around. And every time you pop out one of those dandelions, put in a little compost and a little seed so that if there are more dandelion seeds, it's your seed that's going to sprout in this newly created little bare earth spot and not the dandelion. That's how I would approach that.
So generally, what would the least amount of topsoil need to be in order to grow whatever the hardiest are, whether it's clover and yarrow, and then specifically a small amount of topsoil with sand underneath it?
Well, it's amazing, truly amazing what will grow here in like almost no soil that's just on top of the hard pan. And the clover lawn I put in last year had like 1/2 inch of soil. And we put in another 1/2 inch of mixed compost and soil. And the clover sprouted and grew beautifully. Yeah, so you can actually do it with very little, but you will need to water more often. And every year you're going to, or twice a year, you're going to want to contribute more compost, because what you really need is organic matter there. And then the worms and the plants can help mix it in. Yeah, I'm not a professional, but that's my best guess on that one. And Michael's nodding his head yes, so that's a good sign.
I've done a lot of irrigation assessments all over the place. And in fact, last week I went to a place where I pushed the soil core in. They had a pretty good looking lawn. They've been watering it a fair amount. And it went in like an inch, and so there was grass growing, but they were going to have to water it a lot more. So yeah, I think it's a watering and health issue. If you can get it deeper, you won't have to water as much, and it'll be healthier. And over time, you can aerate and add half an inch of fine compost every year, and it'll gradually build it up.
Yeah, great. Oh,
Diane, do you recommend tilling in soil on top of clay, hard pan?
Some people will recommend doing that. I think tilling is not necessary, and I think it's better to just layer it. Yeah, but people have different opinions on that. When you till, you're going to be breaking up the network, the fungal network, that may indeed be providing nutrients and water to the plants there. And the other thing that does with tilling is it ends up making a hard pan worse, because it gets down at the bottom, it's scraping along and compacting it at the bottom. Yeah, so, but you'll get different opinions from talking to different people. That's mine. Yes.
If you were to put it in and decide not to water, because I don't water right now.
Yes?
It looks like the yarrow and white clover would be the most drought tolerant. If you didn't water it, it might get brown towards the end of the summer, but then would it come back?
Well, you will need to water to get it established,
Right, I
for
see
sure.
that.
But once it's established, what would happen if you didn't water it at all? It would probably be fine.
It might eventually go a little brown towards the end of the summer or something like that.
Yes, you might lose a few plants, but you could reseed. The other day, I was just double checking, taking a look while I was waiting for the bus, and I couldn't believe there was yarrow growing and clover growing next to it, green as could be. Not one drop of water in 3 months, full sun, right on top, hard pan, but there they were. So I would say go for it. Yes, Michael?
Well, yeah, one of the spots where we park on our property, it's not the best soil, and there's yarrow there, and we've never watered that spot. And it's looking pretty good. It's pretty green through this, pretty hot, dry summer.
Yeah, as Tom Cook said at Oregon, he said, boy, you've got to have this mix. Please be sure to include the yarrow, because it's the winner for that. Yeah. Yes.
I don't know if I missed it, but when you were talking about soil amendments, did you actually say you need to put down some soil?
You
A layer of
don't
soil when you're,
you don't have to, depending on the soil that you have.
well, okay, let's say it's non-existent.
Then yes. if your soil is pretty,
It's not funny, it's true.
if your soil is pretty non-existent, you've got to give those little seeds something to grow in.
And when you said doing the cardboard layering, when
Yes.
you prepare the thing, do you take the cardboard out or you just put the stuff on top?
Well, this is something I'm going to try, but haven't actually tried it yet for a lawn. I use the cardboard method to create new garden spaces, and then the remaining cardboard isn't an issue. But here's what I am going to try, because we have these incredibly skimpy, thin soil situations, but we also don't want necessarily the look of plastic over our lawns. So with the cardboard, what I'm going to try, and I can report back, is put down the cardboard on top of the grass, sprinkle it with probably some compost would be the best thing, or wood chips, something. And then over the course of the winter, the cardboard will primarily decompose. It will kill what's underneath there. And in the spring, when it's time to seed, if there's any remaining, I'll rake it. And so any remaining bits of cardboard will come up. If I used wood chips, they'll come up. And then there will be the dead grass will come up, and there should be nice bare soil underneath that for me to seed into. And I'll rough it up, seed, put some more compost on top of it, roll it in, water the heck out of it if it isn't raining, but it probably will be, and go from there.
So that's what you're planning to do?
Yeah, I haven't done it yet. This is an experiment that I want to
But
do.
would you recommend leaving the cardboard there so that over time it continues to decompose? Or?
I wouldn't recommend leaving the cardboard there because if you want to seed that area, that's not going to get through the cardboard. You're going to have to take the cardboard off if there's any remaining. Most of it will have just decomposed. But if there is any remaining, you'll want to remove it because it will be a barrier for your seeds to sprout and get their little roots down. If you were doing a perennial bed of flowers, leave it and then just cut holes and pop your vegetables or your flowers in amongst the cardboard, and it'll provide more weed barrier for you. But we're talking lawns here. Yes.
So you mentioned on the deer-proof.
Resistant.
Deer.
Deer-resistant mix.
But it gets up to 48 inches tall, and if you were to mow it once or twice a year, I think that it would still be 48 inches.
Yes, because you could select seeds. If you didn't want it that tall, you could find out which seeds are in the mix were that tall and don't get those. But you could mow it, I would think that mix, you'd maybe only do it once a year in the fall when everything is done. And so it'll start up fresh in the spring.
And also on that, this might be a big question, but it was the 34% perennial. Does that mean you need to reseed?
I think so, unless they're reseeding annuals, you know, and that's where if you mow, you definitely want to leave, you know, if it's gone to seed, that's a good thing, especially if it's the annuals, and they'll fall down and continue their propagation. You'll have to keep an eye on it and see in your particular case if there's annuals in there that are coming back nicely or if they tend to disappear, in which case you'll want to supplement with that particular seed every year or every couple of years as needed for your case.
Is it, if you are putting more topsoil on top of what you already have there, if what you already have is growing weeds, can you kill those weeds by putting enough compost and topsoil on top of them?
Without killing them any other way?
Yeah.
We did that in the lawn that I did with the clover lawn. We didn't cardboard it, we didn't rototill it. All we did was lime it, mow it short, spread lime, spread the mix, a half-inch mix of compost and soil over the weeds, and then seeded and rolled it in. And right before, in that window of opportunity, and that clover came up and outcompeted the weeds. Yeah, so that it is certainly possible to do it that way. And this was in a very, very thin soil. Very thin soil. Yes.
You said lime, is it because a lot of the soil here is
A lot of the soil here is acid. It's very acid, and so the pH is low. And well, clover in this particular case wanted, and grass, by the way, wants it not so acid, and so that will also discourage moss if you don't want moss, but it'll encourage the plants to grow better that you do want.
So
and
what is the lime?
the lime is calcium carbonate. It's a rock powdered up, and it makes it less acid. But you have to do it, you have to put a lot on, and you have to do it over time, like several years in a row, for it to make much of a difference. Yeah.
If you have a lot of moss in your lawn, is that an indicator that it's acid?
It's, if you have a lot of moss in your lawn, it's an indicator that you have acid soil and poor drainage, and compacted soil. Because I've seen moss grow in full sun in lawns. Right. So it's both acid and compacted soil that the moss tends to grow. I like moss. We haven't talked about moss lawns, but that's an option too. Any other questions? Oh, we're gonna get out early. So, hey, thank you all very, very much for coming. I hope you learned something, and I hope you're inspired to give this a go. Be sure to take some of those handouts, and there's information on the table over there. And please, please, please fill out your evaluation form and leave it anywhere on your way out, or mail it to me, or email it to me, or comments, whatever, so that so we can know what to do next time. Thank you.